are listening to the AOTA podcast. Here is your host, Matt Brandenburg.
Our presenting sponsor for the AOTA podcast is New York University Steinhardt's Department of Occupational Therapy. Well, today we are joined by Apple Sepulveda. Apple, it's very nice to meet you, and I want to thank you for sharing your time to speak with us and share some of your knowledge and experience with us today.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Of course. You are a co-founder of the Nurture Collective, an occupational therapist and lactation consultant. What kind of motivated you and led you to focus your practice and scholarship through these expertise areas on maternal-infant mental health?
Well, a few years back, around maybe 2012, 2014, everything's blurry due to COVID, right? COVID really messed up everything.
It really did.
So around that time, I'm a pediatric occupational therapist, and I practice at a freestanding hospital, children's hospital in Los Angeles. And my clinical expertise is feeding and swallowing. I'm also a lactation consultant, so I see newborns. I focus in infant development, so I see newborns that are coming from the NICU, and we're seeing for an evaluation or treatments for feeding difficulties or developmental delays. And as I saw clients that had feeding difficulties, I've noticed that their moms are depressed, they're disengaged. They're usually overly worried and anxious. And I recognize and I realize, right, like, what am I doing, right? What am I doing for this child if I'm not helping this mom? And one client really had struck me the most, because I saw this kid for feeding difficulties and been seeing them for a while, but mom was very, very disengaged. And as the child is getting better, there's still a lot of issues that I've seen, right? Not just with the feeding, but with the parent-child relationship. And so I said to myself, I'm trying to help this mom, but I'm very limited because as an OT, you see the child, especially at a children's, a pediatric place, right? You are there as a provider of a child. And I remember talking to a boss of mine, and I said, something needs to be done. Like, these children do not walk into our facilities by themselves. They come in with a parent. But at that time, nobody is talking about postpartum depression. A lot of these kids who have congenital disabilities or congenital delay, developmental delays, or had stayed in the NICU, or, have been who came out very early, super preemie. Their parents are so stressed, and a lot of them experience PTSD, postpartum depression, postpartum anxiety, and there's a lot of studies on that. At that time in our practice, nobody's talking about it from the practice level, right? We know it exists. Nobody talks about it. And so I brought that up to my boss, and I said, hey, something has to be done. It's like, oh, I don't know. Yeah, that makes a good point, but let's see if we can make that happen. And at that time, I talked to the legal department. I talked to risk management and, a few higher ups. And they said, oh, there's really nothing we could do. It's the child's insurance that pays for our services, and you are a provider for the child. But there's really no way that you could bring in or screen for postpartum depression, because where does that go in that chart? We have the child's chart. And I said, well, seriously, it makes sense, right? From a system procedural level, that the chart has to be connected to the child. But then again, it doesn't really, these children are not coming to the clinic by themselves. And so at that time, I recognized that it is a huge problem, right? But because we don't have systems in place. And so at that time, I said, okay, so then if I cannot solve this issue here within the premises of the facilities, I can go out and see what's out there, right? And so I joined a nonprofit and really joined their leadership team for a huge amount of time, and learned the barriers of maternal mental health care. I recognize that our systems are bifurcated. There is a mental health system and a physical health system, just like that we have a mental health plan in our insurance, and we have dental, we have vision. So everything is, separated in that aspect. So it's all fragmented. And I also recognize that, the child's insurance is separate from the mom. And so I looked at a lot of barriers. And one of the barriers that I saw is that as occupational therapists, we are not very comfortable in screening for postpartum depression. Nobody wants to talk about it, right? Because it opens a whole new can of worms. And so at that time, I was doing a post-professional doctorate program, and I did a project on surveying occupational therapists to see what are the barriers. Like, do you think it is our role? And I think only 20% thought it was our role to screen for postpartum depression, but that was a long, long time ago. And so I made it a point to learn the barriers, know the rules first, look at the systems that are in place, and then also started educating therapists, right, on why we should screen. How do we talk about it? Also, I created a toolkit to help them come up with some talking points, right? What if a mom is depressed? What do you talk to them about? How do you talk about it? How do you bring up help, And also what was important to me was doing it. And so even though it brought in a lot of discomfort, I just started screening moms for postpartum depression. I did a research study on postpartum depression and doing a parenting program for moms who have post-NICU graduates. And that really helped me hone my skills in supporting moms. And also at the same time, I took some classes. I volunteered in the community and did a lot of work and learning to be able to help moms, and not just moms, but parents who are depressed and who are suffering from anxiety or worry, because parenting is hard, right? But more so if you have a child that is coming from the NICU or have complex medical needs and developmental delays. And so that was the story. That's how I began to actually make it my mission to integrate maternal and infant mental health, not just in occupational therapy, but also in early intervention, which I thought was the lowest hanging fruit that I could address easily. I thought, but it's not that easy. I figured being in here doing this work for 3 years now.
It sounds like a huge undertaking, and it's one where your work is inspirational, and where you identified this need and have started an organization and the Nurture Collective to help fill that need and to increase the impact and scope that occupational therapy can have in addressing these issues and concerns. I really like how you emphasize the importance of professionals to, study and be aware of evidence related to maternal infant mental health. And, OT is well suited to address the mental health needs and the physical health needs that, as you said, are sometimes very segmented within our healthcare systems. Can you give us some background knowledge and information about how kind of mental health impairments develop in children and kind of paint a picture of what the quote unquote ideal mental health would look like in a child?
what is an ideal mental health, right? I don't know if that exists, but studies now, we have studies more than ever that had shown us that early childhood mental health, and they call it infant mental health, right, is a foundation for overall health and development of a child. And these are rooted in social emotional relationships. And how that starts is through the parent-child relationship. The first engagement of the child to the world is through the lens of, of their relationship, of their parents, right? And so now, like the Harvard Center for Developing Child has a lot of studies on how brains develop, because social and emotional development, it starts with a good relationship of the child and the parent or the caregiver, right? The way the parent engages with the child at that very early age enhances the sense of security and attachment of the child, right? The serve and return, it's the way when the child says something or does something, the parent reacts to it as a way they having a conversation, and that sort of conversation that will build on that relationship that builds on social emotional health, right? Which is the foundation of good mental health, right? They're able to cope. Their ability to sense that there is a secure environment, the ability to regulate their own emotions, the ability to, and that really starts at early childhood, between 0 to 5 years old. And that's why, and there's a lot more studies about that right now. And there's correlations between speech delays and maternal depression, which is, or also developmental delays, overall developmental delays and maternal depression or parental depression. And there's even studies that paternal depression is correlated to oppositional defiant disorders in boys in 10th grade, So it's now we know more than ever that early childhood mental health impacts, the overall health and development of the child as they go on through life, just not in the beginning, like through adulthood, but the rest of their lives, right? Throughout the lifespan.
Yeah. It's really makes a lot of sense. And how does kind of prioritizing that social emotional development, how could that help to address some development delays that children may be experiencing?
Addressing social emotional development, I think first has to start with addressing the social emotional state of the parent, because the parent's mental health serves as the foundation of the social emotional development of the child. So number one, can the parent read the needs of the child? Are they receptive to the needs of the child? And because the being receptive of the child's need and being able to look at their cues is correlated to the child's social emotional development, we have to look at the parent's ability to actually read their cues, to understand their cues. And also the children, when they're born, babies, when they're born, cannot regulate their emotions. So they need a caregiver to co-regulate with them. Because of that importance, we as occupational therapists should be able to screen moms for if they have mental health, they are experiencing mental health challenges, because that's where we start. So if a mom screens positive for depression, then we should be able to, number one, address that by referring them out if they need their own mental health therapist, right? Number two, in my sessions, what I do is I look at the symptoms. Oh, the mom has a difficulty reading the child's cues. So then I will sort of narrate the child's cues for the mom and read, point out all the cues that the child is doing in helping mom read that. But also a lot of the times being a parent can be so overwhelming, right? A lot of parents that deal with anxiety are often unsure if they're doing it right? I don't want to mess up this child, or I don't want to ruin this child, even giving the parent the power that they know their child best. Not me as a therapist and a professional. A lot of the times a mom or a parent that deals with anxiety, they defer to the professional, like, oh, you know best. But a lot of the times I give the mom back their power and saying, I may have a doctorate degree in OT, but you have a doctorate degree in this child. You know this child's best. So I will take your lead. I will follow your lead, and we'll work on the things that is important to you. So really making sure that we recognize that or the parent is the foundation for this child's growth and development, and making sure that we support that, whether or not it's mental health, whether or not it's social support. So a lot of the parents that we deal with, we help them apply for programs like WIC or CalFresh, or those government programs that can help them relieve their stress. Because if you have a child that has special needs, plus you also worry about having food on the table or where you get your next paycheck, it can be a lot of stress. It can be very stressful. And so that is one thing that is very important, but not addressing child-specific needs, but also looking at the family as a system as a whole, but also all the social determinants of health that can be impacting that family.
Absolutely. It sounds like such a holistic approach. I think that's one of the greatest benefits of early intervention practice is empowering parents and caregivers to practice, interventions and to make changes that are improving their own health and the health of their infant and the health of their whole family. The Nurture Collective really seems like a wonderful practice, providing that early intervention service while addressing mental health and providing mental health services. How do you initiate the OT process with your own clients? What are kind of the areas or screens that you're looking and assessing for?
Aside from all the procedural developmental evaluations and screenings that we need to do as part of the OT process, we screen the moms for postpartum depression or parents in general. We do the Edinburgh postpartum depression screening, and then the PHQ-9, which is patient health questionnaire. We do it through an app, and the app is called MAMMHA. MAMMHA, and this app actually screens the moms or the parents for depression, and if they score positive, they get contacted by a peer support provider that will help them with their needs, right? Oh, do you need a mental health professional? And I can connect you to one. Give me information in your insurance, and then the peer support provider will just help find somebody for that parent, and then also connect them and do a soft handoff to, or a warm handoff to the families and this parent, and say, hey, this therapist has openings. They take your insurance, you take it from here, but that peer support provider can be that person that the parent needs to talk to. And sometimes these parents, after maternity leave being, they just need somebody to talk to, whether or not they need a lactation consultant or they need help on how do you do this? This is a new crib, or this is a new carrier that I purchased. I need help with this. They just need that. And I think having that service is helpful to us, because then it relieves the OTs of the stress from helping the parents navigate the insurance system, which can be also very, very difficult. Even if you have the best insurance in the world, it is so hard to find specialists out there that take that insurance.
Absolutely. And every plan is different. I think that's an area that can be really difficult, and just another one of those, kind of burdens that are thrust on a new parent that is struggling to figure out, so many other aspects of their life with a new infant and feeling some of those stresses. What's kind of the next step? You initiating the OT process or screening for all of these performance areas. What are some of the aspects of maternal infant mental health that you would suggest other practitioners be screening for and addressing in their treatments?
So in our practice, we have a sensory processing expert. A lot of the times we screen the parents of their own sensory processing needs or preference, and then look at the child's sensory processing preference and see if there is a mismatch, right? If there is a mismatch, then we educate the parent about what to do and how to understand sensory processing. And then that could, with that insight, parents can think through, oh, you know what? Let me just strategize in how to really address the sensory needs of the child, but also be mindful of their own sensory needs, right? So we do that. We have a sleep consultant in our team. So we like sleep is a big thing. When a parent is depressed, they often don't sleep, or the lack of sleep can trigger like a lot of like anxiety and stress. And so we help them with their sleep, with like how do we address sleep within between the parent. But also we have a nutritionist in the team that could help parents with some ideas of what foods to take that can help them with nutrition, especially those breastfeeding parents. So those things that like more looking at this from a holistic perspective and addressing that needs, right? And those are needs that fall into the OT scope, which is activities of daily living. On top of that, all our therapists are trained in infant mental health strategies, right? So we are trained in looking at parent engagement, looking at how to engage parents, what words to say or how to address when a parent is distressed. We use the Touchpoints, the Brazelton's Touchpoints, parent principles, and all our therapists are trained on that, and in really making sure that we understand where the parents are coming from. And we look at that, we use that as a foundation of how we do our work in helping families. But also on top of that, we recognize that this work is very stressful because a lot of us love what we're doing. We like to help families, but we also have our own stressors. We deal with our own issues as well. And this job can be stressful. And so we provide reflective supervision to all our therapists, which is done in a small group, where they get to see a maternal and infant mental health specialist to actually talk about their feelings about a family or their challenges when they have treatments, and they get to process it with an expert. And so in that way, that could help reduce burnout, but also let therapists feel that they are supported.
That's amazing. And it's so evident in everything that occurs at the Nurture Collective that you prioritize the mental health of the infants that you work with the parents that you work with the caregivers that you work with, and also the therapists that are part of that Nurture Collective team. That's a really wonderful example to all occupational therapy practitioners.
Yeah, I mean, it's very common in the therapy world, reflective supervision, and especially in infant mental health. And so we meet with them regularly, and it just really puts things into perspective, because parenting is hard. Oftentimes we are trained to do something, from a school of OT, and then there's a school of infant mental health, but also it wakes up some perspectives or issues that may have, good or bad, dealt with as growing up with our own parents, or, as a mother. Parenting is it's very complex. And so we want to make sure that therapists are supported.
Absolutely. That's truly wonderful. Our presenting sponsor is New York University Steinhardt's top-ranked Department of Occupational Therapy, which now offers an entry-level OTD for aspiring occupational therapists. NYU additionally offers advanced degrees for practicing therapists that can be completed in person or online. Study and work with leading educators, researchers, and master clinicians in the vibrant setting of New York City, and have access to a diverse patient population and extensive healthcare system. Learn to deliver exceptional patient care, or deepen your knowledge and practice as you focus on applied scientific inquiry and clinical areas such as pediatrics, developmental disabilities, mental health, and assistive rehabilitation technologies. Take the next step by visiting steinhardt.nyu.edu/OT to learn more. Apple, could you share with us a case study or clinical example of how you were able to, guide a client or a family through the OT process and saw them achieve, an improved mental health and or developmental outcome?
Yeah, this family that I saw when the child was maybe a month old, he had a neonatal stroke and first baby. And the mom, she was very stressed and had a lot of anxiety. And so I started screening. And then through the screening, we were able to detect she scored positive for depression and was able to get help for her. And then she saw that help separately. But during our sessions, we actually helped. I used the family-centered care approach, using parent-child relationships as the center of my treatments and all of that. At one time, I was working on feeding at that time, and I was feeding this child who had feeding difficulties and had a hard time regulating, won't stop crying, and will stop crying when mom is carrying, and mom is carrying him, and then mom is so burnt out, like mom was saying, like, I can't do anything. And so I asked at that time in my session, I asked about their routines, right? I asked about routines because like OTs, it's part of what we do. Like, okay, what do you do for the day, throughout the day? And I wanted to address more of a routine-based intervention, looking at how can I embed rest times during the day when the mom is at home all day, and how can I incorporate rest and sleep into their routines, right? Tummy time for the baby, but also feeding time, and so that the mom is not spending a lot of time carrying the baby and feeding the child. And so the mom was saying, like, and then I learned from that interview that she does not eat until 4:00. And I said, oh my goodness, like, how can you last all day without eating? And, no wonder you feel tired. No wonder you don't have energy and you just feel so tired. And so I was able to curate my sessions so that we do it around breakfast. I went to their homes and during different times of the day around meal times and make sure that she's able to prepare herself a meal, but also at the same time feed the child. And that was helpful because in that way, mom felt like, oh, I can also eat while I do this mothering thing, and I can find a way that I could really incorporate all these things that I need into our schedule, because a lot of the times moms are in triage mode. They just do whatever they need to do and they put themselves last, not thinking that the airplane principle is important, that they need to take care of themselves too, so that they're able to take care of the child. And so I thought that was a good example of what OTs can do to improve, the developmental outcome. They're no longer my client. They actually have been successful. This child has great developmental outcomes, but also mom is a very strong advocate. They had another baby and they really had learned in the second pregnancy, had learned that all these strategies that I taught them. Yeah, I thought that was a success.
Yeah, that's a beautiful example of really a lot of the principles that you've educated us with today, about emphasizing that parent-child relationship to encourage social and emotional development and see positive developmental outcomes through collaborating with, the mother and the child together.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add too that, the important thing here is the context of OT. I did it within the context of daily living, and that's what puts us in a unique spot as OTs. I did it around meal times. I looked at their schedule. You know what I mean? And so, and that's how, as OT, I think there is our competitive edge.
That's such an excellent point. What would you recommend to practitioners to help them remember the importance of addressing context? What can they do to better address context in their own intervention and approach to treatment?
It isn't just important to look at the foundations of OT. I don't think I could be this effective of an maternal-infant mental health therapist if I didn't lean into the foundations of OTs. I use the context of occupations a lot in the work that I do. Looking at routines, whether or not the routine of washing hands, participation, going, that transition from the clinic to the car, all these things. But also, in my example, the routines of meal times, the routine of activities of daily living. I've done things around, the baby's bath time, sleep, and things like that. And so really don't forget that OT is unique because we function within the context of occupations. And, for a child, there is no occupations. It is the context of the caregiving relationship, the co-occupations, between the child and the parent. Spending time together, caregiving, diaper change, meal times, and things like that. And so I think that is one thing that is to consider, but also the foundations, like grading activities. Like we have so much knowledge on activity analysis, really knowing how to grade activities and how to make it simple. How do we adapt? How do we compensate? And all these other things so that these families can thrive and, meet their goals.
That's a powerful recommendation. Thank you, Apple. What would you say are kind of some further studies or additional research that may be needed to continue advancing the role of occupational therapy as it relates to maternal-infant mental health?
I am a PhD candidate. I'm doing a research on the implementation of maternal and infant mental health in an early intervention system for a state right now. And research exists already in how that maternal and infant mental health, addressing that will address to great outcomes. But I think where research is needed is the implementation, how we do it. What are the barriers and facilitators to implementing maternal and infant mental health in OT? How are we creating systems so that these systems are cost effective? How are these implemented so that they can be paid by insurance? That we should have codes for it. You know what I mean? Because at the end of the day, this is great work that we're doing, but outside the early intervention world, it is hard to implement because of the payment model. And so I think implementation science has a value and can be tapped into. So how we can improve adoption, adoption, but also how we adapt the delivery of the service so that it can be sustainable. Looking at all the processes so that we are able to implement maternal and infant mental health, not just in the early intervention, but in every setting.
And absolutely. This is definitely an area of practice where I don't have a lot of expertise in, or, life experience in, not being a parent, but it sounds so needed and it sounds so valuable. And I want to congratulate you on being a PhD candidate. Your research sounds very needed and it sounds very innovative.
My main intention is really, a lot of people want to do it, but how we do it and how we do it in a way that is sustainable is the big question. What I'm doing with Nurture Collective is what the state is doing and the state that I'm studying is doing. And just as I'm doing it, I am learning, right? What are the pain points? What are the barriers? And what makes it successful? What other processes do we need? What systems change do we need to be able to make it sustainable? And it is a learning process, and I'm still learning.
Absolutely. And for our listeners who are maybe listening to this and they're wanting to incorporate more of this into their own approach to care, what resources or certifications related to addressing maternal infant mental health in OT would you recommend to them?
Postpartum Support International has a certification in perinatal mental health. I think that's one thing that they have to look into. OTs can now take the test and be certified in perinatal mental health, but also infant mental health training. They can look into infant, each state has an infant mental health association, or they call it endorsements. They can look into that and see what the endorsement process is in their state, and they could not even like endorsement can be extensive, but looking at infant mental health training, right? Like the Brazelton Institutes, Touchpoints. We are also doing a lot of training. We're doing training from the Erikson Institutes, facilitating attuned interactions. Those are things that we are doing as part of our Nurture Collective team. So I think those two are really a good place to start to get their field wet and do a lot of self-study and practice. Just practice. You'll be surprised if we empower the parents. They will teach us a lot more than we are teaching them.
I love that. I think that's an important frame of reference to bring to all areas of practice within OT, in learning from the people that we work with and we treat. And that makes practice more efficient, and more effective as well.
Yes. Thank you.
Of course. You shared so much wonderful information, but if there was just one piece of advice or recommendation that you could give practitioners, what would it be?
I think what I learned and what I could share is that don't settle for the status quo. If you feel that something needs to change in the systems or how we want to work, be that change. Because oftentimes when I got into OT, I did not quite understand what OT was about, because I'm Filipino. In the context of what we were taught when I did my undergrad in OT in the Philippines is you help the sick people be independent. And then from a cultural perspective, I just didn't understand that because we took care of our sick. And so my lesson is that when I was told, no, we cannot address maternal and infant mental health because of the systems, I went out of my way to learn the barriers, to learn the policy, to learn the different systems, and do the best I could to help address this in one way or another. And the lowest hanging fruit that I found is addressing it through early intervention. And so, just don't accept the status quo. If you feel like something needs to change, you can be a part of the change.
I love that. That's such a wonderful message, Apple. And I want to thank you for sharing your lived experience with us. And I want to thank you for being a part of that change and making such a great impact in the lives of the people that you work with.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Matt.
Of course. Thank you, listener, for tuning in. And thank you to NYU Steinhardt Program in Occupational Therapy for sponsoring this episode.
Thanks for listening to the AOTA podcast. Tune in again next time.